I was 75, and I dared to marry again. But right in the middle of the ceremony, my son stood up and told my bride, "You've made a mistake. This old man will die soon. Come with me." He grabbed her hand and shoved me so hard the guests gasped. I stood there, shaking with fury, realizing this wasn't just jealousy. This was war. And only a week later, he was sentenced to life in prison. But for what? I am Walter Hale, grandfather to a bright 10-year-old named Lily, who draws me cards with stick figures and lopsided hearts. Until my son tried to steal my wedding, I believed I had already survived the worst thing a man could endure, the loss of my wife. 49 years of marriage ended on a pine staircase one quiet afternoon. A misstep, the coroner said. An accident, the papers called it. I tried to believe them. I tried to keep the house warm and the garden tidy and my voice steady when Lily asked why Grandma would not wake up. I am the sort of man who fixes things. For 34 years I ran a hardware store on Main Street, where folks brought me their bent screws and cracked handles, and I sent them home with a plan. You get used to the comfort of parts that fit. You learn the names of small pieces that keep everything together. After Anne died, the house turned into an orchestra of small failures I could not tune. The back door stuck in humidity no matter how I planned it. The porch light flickered, and for the first time in 5 decades, I let it. Her favorite saucepan warped slightly, and I could not bring myself to replace it. I set it back on the hook the way a man sets a photograph back on the mantel and tells himself that is enough. I woke earlier than I needed to because the mornings were worst. The air felt too big for one man. I boiled the kettle and let it scream a few seconds too long because that sharp sound proved something still required me. I talked to the empty rooms the way I used to talk to Anne when she was upstairs and I was down, narrating nothing. Turning the coffee now. Paper is damp from the porch. Looks like rain. It is surprising how much of marriage is the hum that runs beneath the music. When the music stops, you notice the absence of hum like a silence in your bones. I kept busy the way men of my generation were taught to keep busy when the heart buckles. I oiled the mower, arranged the nails by size, scrubbed the kitchen grout until my fingers cramped, and still the house felt like a stage after the audience goes home. I closed our bedroom door at night and pretended it was to save heat, not because I could not stand the shape her absence made in the dark. On Sundays I sat in our pew at church and let other people sing around me. Once, in the middle of a hymn Anne loved, I found my throat closing as if the air itself had turned thick. Lily slipped her small hand into mine without looking up from the hymnal, and I steadied. I tried to eat properly. I made a calendar for myself with neat boxes and penciled in ordinary promises. Walk, call Frank, mail the bills, check the smoke alarms. Grief is not loud for very long. It is a slow wait. It makes a man careful in ridiculous ways. I started stepping around the 3rd stair from the top because it creaked, and I could not bear that particular sound. I left her sweater folded on the foot of the bed so the room would smell like lavender a little longer. I kept her teacup on the counter, rinsed and waiting, like a theater prop I did not know how to strike. Lily kept me anchored to the living. She is 10, all elbows and declarative sentences. She drew me those lopsided heart cards and taped them to my refrigerator until the silver turned into a patchwork. She asked good questions and some terrible ones. Why are grown-ups quieter after funerals? Does heaven understand when someone talks in their sleep? Can you still be married if one person is not here to answer? We baked cookies that came out hard because I forgot the timer, and she ate them anyway and called them good. She left crayons in my silverware drawer by accident, and I never moved them. There is comfort in stumbling across small evidence that life continues without your permission. People dropped by in the first weeks with lasagnas and hugs they held too long, which I appreciated until I did not. The doorbell became a test. Some days I smiled and nodded and accepted whatever casserole carried their worry. Other days I stood still in the hallway and let it ring until it stopped. My son, Daniel, came with his collar askew and his voice pitched for pity. He gripped my shoulder and told me to let him handle things. He was very swift to ask about the mortgage, the safe deposit box, the papers. I remember thinking he was being practical. I remember being grateful not to think. There were little things I did not say out loud. The newel post on the staircase looked cleaner than the banister around it, as if someone had wiped it in a hurry. The pill bottle in the bathroom was on a different shelf than the one where Anne kept it, next to the bandages instead of the cotton balls. Daniel arrived before the ambulance, even though I had not called him yet. I filed each thought away like a receipt you are not sure you need. That is the bargain you strike with yourself when your world depends on the benefit of the doubt. Nights were the longest. I would sit at the kitchen table with the porch light flickering and write to Anne in a yellow notepad I told myself was for groceries. I wrote the small things I could not say to anyone without breaking. I found your hairpin under the chair cushion. Your favorite pen finally ran out. The peonies opened the way you said they would. I wrote her that I was afraid of becoming one of those men who turns into a shadow in his own house. I wrote that the silence made me clumsy with kindness, that sometimes I answered Lily too sharply because I was tired, and then I sat in the dark and waited for my temper to cool. My knees hurt more than they used to, and I learned the extra minute it takes to stand from a chair without looking like I am bracing a ship in a storm. I stopped driving at night if I could help it because headlights felt like interrogations. I kept my suits clean in case someone needed me to be presentable at short notice. All of it added up to a life reduced to maintenance. You can keep a man alive that way. You cannot keep him whole. Friends tried to pull me into their lives. Poker on Thursdays, breakfast at Millie's, the fishing trip I had been promising since the last century. I went once or twice and came home more tired than when I left. It is strange how people you have known for years become visitors when one of you is missing. They meant well. They talked around the exact shape of my loss. I did not blame them. I did not know how to talk about it either. What I knew was work, loyalty, and the way a garden repays attention. So I paid attention. I kept the bird bath clean. I deadheaded Anne's roses and told them they were doing fine, as if roses respond to pep talks. I shoveled neighbors' sidewalks out of habit. I made small repairs for women from church who could not lift their ladders and refused money every time, because there has to be some corner of a day where a thing is simply right and does not need explaining. If you had asked me then what I needed, I would have said nothing. That is what men like me say when the true answer is almost everything. I needed a voice in the house that was not mine. I needed someone to notice when I put the fork in the knife slot. I needed to be witnessed, not as a widower to be handled or a father to be managed, but as a man who was still here. I did not know that yet. I only knew that I was tired of listening to my own footsteps. And so I kept the house warm, and the garden tidy, and my voice steady when Lily asked why Grandma would not wake up. I was doing the best I could inside a life I had not chosen, trying to believe the people in uniforms and the words on paper, and the version of events that let me go to bed without tearing something open I did not know how to close. I thought the worst had already happened. I did not know my quiet would be mistaken for weakness, or that somebody I loved had been counting on it. Grief tricked me into smaller living. I wore the same cardigan every day. I let my world shrink to the length of my driveway and the evening news. Meals became practical, not pleasant. Eggs because they were easy. Soup because it kept. I stopped answering the phone after 9. I learned the creak in the third stair the way a man learns to step around an old injury. Even the birds at the feeder seemed to quiet when I passed, as if the house had taught every living thing to lower its voice. Then Miriam arrived like sunlight slipping under a closed door. I met her in the clerk's office when I went to notarize a form I did not really need, the kind of errand you invent to keep from sinking. She held the door with one hand and a stack of transcripts with the other, and when she said good morning, it was not filler, it was an invitation. 62, sharp-eyed without being sharp-tongued, a court reporter whose job had trained her to hear what people meant as well as what they said. Her listening had weight to it. When she asked how I was doing, she waited for the real answer like a patient fisherman, quiet line on the water. We started with coffee at Millie's, where the waitress calls everyone honey and pretends not to notice when people sit longer than they drink. Miriam asked about Lily and remembered her name the second time. She told me how the ink on her machine dries if she forgets to close the cap, and how she keeps a little jar of pennies on her windowsill to remind herself that small things still add up. We graduated to walks along the river where she matched her pace to mine without making a fuss about it. She laugh-hummed the way some people sing under their breath. Pleasant, unnoticed until you realize the room feels better for it. Dinners came after, simple ones. Pot roast, baked fish. The kind of food that behaves in the oven so you can talk without worrying. I had a day with her, a small day, that cracked something open. We were driving home from the grocery store and the sky pulled one of those late spring tricks where the sun burns through while rain still needles the pavement. The street went silver. She reached over and turned off the wipers at the exact moment they started to squeak. "Listen," she said, and the car filled with the soft patter that used to put my wife to sleep. It came to me suddenly, the way Anne would stand at the kitchen sink during storms and count between lightning and thunder, fingers tapping the basin in threes like a private metronome. She would say, "Light first, then sound. You always hear the proof a little late." We have a memory every marriage leans on, a small scene that keeps proving itself. Mine is a morning years back when we woke to a leak over the stove after the first frost thawed. I found Anne already on a chair with a mixing bowl, hair pinned up any which way. "Put the bowl under where it drips," I said, reaching for a towel. She shook her head. "No," she said, laughing. "Under where it will drip next." Then she looked at the ceiling and moved the bowl an inch to the left without explaining. By the time the next drop fell, it landed with a bright sound in exactly the place she had predicted. She had a talent for anticipating what came after, for catching trouble before it named itself. That morning she had winced when she climbed down, one hand ghosting over the banister. "Feels slick," she murmured, rubbing her palm like she had touched oil. I teased her for noticing everything. She teased me back for noticing nothing. Later that week she had asked me to move her pills down from the high shelf. I keep finding them in the wrong place, and I would rather not climb. And I felt good for being useful, for reaching what she could not. I did not think then about why the shelf kept changing or who moved it. At the time it felt like ordinary marriage talk, the choreography of two people adapting to the day's small hazards. It is only in hindsight that a man hears the note in a familiar song go half a step off. Sitting in the car with Miriam, rain easing into brightness, I told her the story about the bowl and Anne's ability to get ahead of the drip. Miriam smiled, palm warm on the grocery list between us. "She sounds like someone who saved you 100 needless steps," she said. I felt a thud behind my ribs, like a door unsticking. The grief did not leave. It shifted, made room, the way a heavy box slides when a second pair of hands lifts without comment. With Miriam, my days lengthened by inches. I changed my cardigan for a clean shirt because she might stop by. I fixed the porch light because she said she would like to see the tulips when she left after supper. She sat at my kitchen table and wrote her notes while I wrote mine, and the old hum of married life, two people moving around each other, doing nothing in particular together, came back in a different key. When I told a story, she did not interrupt to improve it. When I fell silent, she did not rush to fill the quiet. She just waited, and in the waiting I found words I had avoided, including the ones about the slick banister and the pills shifting shelves and a faint smell of lemon cleaner on the newel post that I could not remember using. We did not name our suspicions then. We named ordinary things: birds, aches, weather, the pleasure of a cup of coffee that goes cold because conversation gets good. We named our walks jokingly, as if they were routes on a map: the short loop, the bridge loop, The bakery loop where the owner started slipping a fifth roll into the bag when he saw us together. 6 months later, after enough dinners where her laugh hummed against the window panes that the glass felt tuned to it, I asked her to marry me. She said yes so gently I felt 20 again, like the first time a girl took my hand and the world rearranged around that simple fact. And somewhere beneath that new yes, a smaller truth turned over and opened its eye. Light first, then sound. Proof comes after. My son, Daniel, did not congratulate me. He did not ask about vows or venues. He asked about my will. He showed up with a manila folder under his arm, sat at my kitchen table, and spread papers the way a contractor spreads blueprints over a problem he is eager to demolish. "We need to update beneficiaries," he said, tapping lines with a pen hard enough to leave dents. "House, accounts, the shop proceeds. Miriam cannot just walk into what Mom built." His voice had that clipped, managerial tone he uses when he is angry and pretending not to be. He wanted signatures on the spot. He wanted a notary the same afternoon. He wanted to know where I kept the keys to the safe deposit box and whether I had misplaced any documents lately. When I hesitated, he leaned in and said, "Dad, you are not thinking this through." The push did not stop there. He suggested a cognitive evaluation just to have it on file, in case someone challenges your decisions later, and slid a printed list of elder law attorneys across the table like a menu. He wanted a prenup that read like a threat, and a power of attorney that named only him for efficiency. He tried to pick up my checkbook while we talked, palming it as if absent-minded, and when I reached for it he smiled too wide and said he was only tidying. He asked for Miriam's full name, her ex-husband's name, her credit score if I had it, and whether she took any medication that might affect judgment. He said all of this quickly, in a low voice, with a patience that felt brittle. Once when I told him the house title would remain as it was, he jabbed his finger at my chest hard enough to bruise and called me naive. I told myself it was grief talking, that he was protecting his mother's memory and did not know where to put his worry. I saw how ugly it looked. His urgency, the timing, the way he kept glancing toward the staircase as if measuring something I could not see. But I made excuses because a father is good at building them. I told myself boys do not like new mothers, even when they are grown men with mortgages. I told myself he was practical, that he had always been the numbers-minded one, that the folder and the lists and the lawyer names were a son's clumsy way of love. When he asked, "You have not moved the pill bottles again, have you?" "You get turned around." I laughed it off and said I would make a drawer for my medicine so nobody would climb. He nodded like a foreman signing off on a repair and left the manila folder behind on purpose, a paperweight on my kitchen air. I stacked it with the unpaid utility bills and told myself we would talk again when he had calmed down, when he could see that a second chance at companionship did not have to be a first step toward losing him. In that moment, I could not have predicted how my life would be turned upside down by a revelation just days later. You would not believe the truth hiding in plain sight. The harsh reality will be unveiled soon. But before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments what time it is where you are. For marriage, we chose a small ceremony in the chapel where Lily was baptized. Nothing fancy, a simple suit for me, a light blue dress for Miriam, and yellow roses because my first wife loved them. The place smelled of old wood and candle wax. Dust hung in the sunlight like confetti that had not learned to fall. Lily's patent shoes tapped the pew, a small bright metronome. We had just reached the part where the pastor asked if anyone objected when a chair scraped the floor like a knife. Daniel stood up, smile stretched thin as piano wire, eyes bright the way a hunter's eyes get when the brush moves. "You have made a mistake," he told Miriam. "This old man will die soon. Come with me." It was not a shout. It was pitched to carry. He had chosen his spot. End of the pew, aisle clear, everyone watching. He said her name first, then labeled me a burden, like he was filing paperwork out loud. He showed the palms of his hands for a heartbeat. the way people do before they touch a frightened animal. And then he grabbed her wrist with a turn that pinned the bones without leaving a mark. That was not clumsy anger. That was practice. I stepped between them on instinct. He did not hesitate. His palm hit my chest exactly where an old man's balance is most fragile. The pew behind me caught my spine and the breath left my body in a hot rush. Guests gasped. I saw him watch their reaction, not with shame, but with interest, as if measuring whether he had picked the right leverage. Lily cried out my name from the second row. Daniel's expression changed for an instant, not toward her, but toward the sound. Another variable noted. The ushers moved, shoulders squared. He did not back away from their size. He adjusted his tie. Miriam raised her chin before anyone could touch him. "Let go of me," she said. Calm, precise, courtroom calm. He let go at once as if a switch had flipped. He smoothed his jacket cuff and stepped back half a pace, drawing a line on the floor he could claim he had never crossed. I had a sudden, terrible thought. He knew how far he could go. He had rehearsed what to say, how loud to make it, how to look concerned while creating the fire. He had come for a scene, not a brawl, a story he could later retell as rescue. I was still catching my breath when he turned to the room, face arranged into injured righteousness, and started addressing our guests like a jury. "You all know what is happening here," he said, moving his gaze from person to person, recruiting them with eye contact he had used 1,000 times to talk his way through trouble. He called Miriam a gold digger, me senile, but the words were almost secondary. What mattered was the control. He stood in the aisle like a dam, forcing people to choose sides just to exit. We did not finish the ceremony. Not there. I took Lily's small hand and felt how damp her palm had gone, and led Miriam out through the chapel side door. Behind us, Daniel's voice carried, steady, relentless, building a narrative over our backs. He was not ranting to vent. He was laying rail, for the record, as he liked to say, so that later he could point and say, "See? I tried to save him." Outside, the air felt colder than it should have. My hands shook, not from the shove, but from the recognition that slid into place like a key. This was not a son struggling with change. This was a man who treated people like furniture, useful when they supported him, obstacles when they did not. We finished our vows that night in Miriam's kitchen, just the three of us, and a pastor who had seen enough of families to carry a spare book of vows in his glove compartment. The bulb over the sink hummed softly. Lily held the roses like a brave herald, petals yellow as small suns. The pastor blessed us that night. The license would wait for quieter days. I cried when I said the words in sickness and in health because I had learned the shape of both, and because, for the first time, I admitted to myself that Daniel's cruelty had edges too clean to be accidental. He had pressed, then stopped. He had humiliated, then smiled. He knew where the lines were drawn, and he liked standing with his toes on them. The next morning the chapel called first. Then a patrol car nosed up to the curb. Calm lights. No siren. An officer with neat hair and a wedding band introduced himself and said there had been multiple reports of an incident. He used the word assault the way people use the word weather. Factual, unemotional. He asked if I would like to make a statement. At the station they sat us in a small room that smelled like copier ink. The officer clicked his pen and asked for the sequence. When Daniel stood, what he said, where his hands were, the force of the shove. I heard myself downplay things because that is what fathers do when the truth hurts our own bones. "It was more of a push," I said, and saw Miriam's eyebrows tighten by a fraction. The officer asked if this was the first time Daniel had put his hands on me. I took longer than I should have to say yes. Miriam did not look at me. She watched the officer's fingers. She noticed how he circled and underlined small words. That is her trade, catching the words everyone else steps over. By noon we got the call. Daniel had been picked up at his apartment and booked on misdemeanor assault and disorderly conduct. There would be a protective order. He was angry, they said, but cooperative. The bond was small. The arraignment would be quick. I thanked the caller and hung up and stood very still in my kitchen. The phrase picked up sits heavy. It means a person you love goes into a building and comes out with a number. We sat at the table with the yellow roses between us, their scent too sweet for the day. Miriam rested her hand flat on the wood, steady. "He knew when to stop," she said, not unkindly. "At the chapel." He let go the instant I said it. He chose the aisle seat. He made sure there were witnesses. He called us names that imply we are either fools or thieves, both helpful if he needs a story later. He is good at drawing lines for himself and daring other people to cross them. "He is my son," I said. It came out like a defense and a prayer. "I know," she said, "and he knows that you know." I let that sit. It was not the first time I had seen the switch in him, the quick trimming of his sails when the wind changed. Years ago, on the porch, he had stepped too close during an argument about money, his face inches from mine, and then, when a neighbor's screen door squeaked, he laughed and clapped me on the shoulder like the whole thing had been a joke between men. He had cried convincingly at his mother's funeral, tears placed like commas between polite greetings, and then dried his eyes fast enough to ask about the safe deposit key when he thought nobody was listening. Cruel people will tell you a story and then look you in the eye to see whether you will help them believe it. "Do you think he would have hurt you more if the camera had not been there?" Miriam asked. I had forgotten about the camera, the small black eye above the chapel doors that streams baptisms to grandparents who cannot travel. I remembered Daniel glancing up briefly, just before he smoothed his cuff. "I think he likes rooms," I said. "He likes rooms to be arranged around him." Miriam nodded. "A courtroom is a room." "He is not on trial," I said. I heard how weak it sounded. "Walter," she said, voice soft but anchored. "He is on record now." "Assault. There will be a file. Names go into systems. Sometimes systems talk to each other. I thought of little things I had filed under grief and coincidence. The lemon smell on the newel post the day Anne fell, when neither of us had cleaned. The pill bottle moving shelves. The watch reflection in the china cabinet glass that morning Lily took a photograph. I thought of Daniel's manila folders, his list typed out like it was business. None of it proved anything. All of it hummed. We set terms for ourselves that afternoon. Small guardrails in a life that had felt like a shoulderless road. We would save every message from Daniel. We would not meet him alone. We would keep records, dates, times, words. I would answer the phone in the living room where Miriam could hear me. It felt ridiculous to make rules for your own son, like baby gates late in life. But I felt my lungs ease when we were done. Safety is not always about locks. Sometimes it is about refusing to stand where someone likes to push. The protective order arrived the next day, sharp edges of legal paper on my kitchen counter. The ink looked too black. I could not bring myself to throw away the envelope, as if some part of me hoped I could mail this moment back. The officer who served it asked me one more time, carefully, if there had been other incidents. He stared at the line where my signature would go and not at my face. "Tensions," I said. "My wife died last year. We have had tensions." He nodded once, the way doctors nod when patients refuse the word cancer. That night, while Lily slept down the hall with a nightlight, Miriam and I lay awake and talked in the low voices people use when they are trying not to wake a child and a past at the same time. She told me about men she has watched from the back of courtrooms, the ones who study the rules like translations, which words to use, where to stand, how to perform regret without letting it touch them. "What matters is the pattern," she said, "not the size of the first act." I wanted to argue that Daniel was not a man like that. I wanted to defend the boy who learned to ride his bike on our cracked sidewalk and came home with grass in his hair and mud on his elbows. Instead, I told her a story I had never said aloud. The day Anne mentioned, almost casually, that the staircase felt slick. The way she asked me to move her pills down because she kept finding them in the wrong place. How Daniel had arrived early that last afternoon to help, and how I had been grateful to see him. I heard the shape of the story as I said it and hated it. Miriam took my hand. "Light first," she said, "then sound." We heard the sound at the chapel. Maybe the light has been here a while. We did not know then that the file labeled assault would wander in its quiet way across a desk that had once held another file with our name on it. We only knew that the first investigation had opened a small door. Which way it swung remained to be seen. The next day moved more slowly than usual. We ate late, the kind of supper you make when the day has taken more than it should. Roast chicken, green beans, a roll torn in half and buttered without thinking. The protective order lay on the counter like a new appliance manual no one had asked for. The roses Lily had carried at the chapel sat in a mason jar. Yellow softened to cream. Miriam poured tea and let the kettle click back to silence. She did not circle the subject. She set her fork down and said, "Walk me through the day Anne died. From when you woke to the siren. No leaps. Just the next thing and the next." I stared at the salt cellar and tried to answer like I was reporting a leak, not a loss. I told her about the way the morning light fell through the kitchen window, the coffee I overpoured, the list Anne left on the counter, bread, birdseed, stamps, and the way she had paused on the stairs to rub her palm along the banister. "Feels slick," she had said, wrinkling her nose. I told Miriam about the phone appointment Anne had at noon, and the way she had asked me, almost sheepishly, to move her pills down to the low shelf because she kept finding them in the wrong place. I told her I had stepped out to the garage for 10 minutes to hunt a screwdriver I never found, and how the house made that hollow sound old houses make when you are not sure if you are alone. "Where was Daniel that afternoon?" Miriam asked. Her voice stayed level, no edge to it, like setting pins in a row. "He said he would drop by after lunch to help with the storm windows," I said. "He has a key." "He has had one for years." I watched her write nothing down. It is a skill, remembering without the shield of paper. "He arrived before the ambulance," I added, the words coming too slow. "I did not call him until after the EMTs were in the foyer. He said a neighbor saw the lights and phoned him. It was a small-town kindness that made sense at the time." "Who else has keys?" she asked. "The cleaning lady." "Me." Anne kept one under the terracotta frog by the back steps because she hated being locked out when her hands were full. My voice sounded defensive even to my own ears, as if I were already arguing with a thing we had not named. Miriam nodded once. "Why did the coroner close it so fast?" "He saw the staircase," I said. "He saw her age. He saw my face. The report said accident. Misstep. There was a bruise above her ear. He said that happens when heads meet corners on the way down. I remembered touching that place at the viewing, my thumb hovering an inch from skin I could not bear to alter." Miriam folded her napkin slowly. "Bruises tell stories. Sometimes they start lower than a fall." "She had bad days," I said too quickly. "Dizzy spells." We had talked about buying those adhesive treads. I was slow to it. That is on me. I heard the clatter of my own excuses and hated the sound, but habit is heavy. Fathers learn to carry the versions of events that keep the children we love closer. She did not argue. She lifted her tea and let the steam fog her glasses a little. "I am going to ask you something that will feel cruel," she said. "When Daniel arrived before the ambulance, how did he know where to stand? Did he go to her right away or look around first?" "He went straight to the stairs," I said. "He shouted for me. He told me to back away and let the professionals do their job. He put his hand on the newel post and then took it away like it stung. And—" I stopped, feeling the foolishness of what came next. "There was a lemon smell. I do not use lemon cleaner. I told myself the cleaning lady must have come the day before and I had not noticed. Miriam's eyes flicked to the roses. "When you stepped between us at the chapel," she said quietly, "Daniel pushed you where you would fall and be caught, not where you would break. He knows rooms. I think he knew your house that day, too." She reached across and set her hand on mine. "I am not accusing. I am listening for the pattern. If there is one, we will hear it." We cleared the dishes because it gave us something to do with our hands. The kitchen felt like a stage after the audience goes home. Props still in place. Story finished for the evening. Truth hiding in the wings. Before bed, she said, "Tomorrow, let us stop guessing. Let us look." The next morning, Miriam arrived at the table with coffee and a thin folder. She had pulled the coroner's report from the public system and printed it, paper warm from the machine. There it was in black lines and careful language. Blunt force trauma consistent with a fall. Contusion noted above the right ear. No signs of struggle. Accidental. Beneath it, the time of death estimated between 11 and 1. "You said your garage hunt was around 11:40, she said. "You called 911 at 12:06. Then, almost shyly, she opened her laptop and pressed play on a saved voicemail. The last one my wife had left her. Miriam had met Anne months earlier at the courthouse, swapping recipes and widow stories in the echoey hallway where bailiffs drink coffee. Anne's voice came thin through the tiny speaker, but still hers, with the apologetic upward lilt she used when she felt foolish. She asked Miriam about a word she had heard in a documentary, guardianship. Then she laughed, said I am being silly, and hung up. I felt something colder than grief settle under my breastbone, a weight different from loss. It was the weight of an answer taking shape. There are duties a husband owes the dead beyond flowers and folded suits. One is to stop being useful to a lie. Another is to tell the truth, even when it chooses a face you love. I owed Anne the truth about how she died, and the path toward it had started. We started at the staircase. Gloves on. Slow. Practical. The banister looked normal until it did not. One short stretch was brighter than the rest, the kind of clean you only see when sunlight hits just right. When I leaned close, I caught the faintest lemon. It could have been the cleaning lady. It could have been me, forgetting. Under the sink, an unfamiliar spray bottle sat behind ours, capped not quite tight. That could have been hers too. We took photos anyway. We bagged the bottle. We wrote down the time. At the station, the detective logged our items, sealed them, and gave us numbers. "Chain of custody," he said. "No promises." Watching that box disappear through a door felt like handing over a version of my house I might never get back. One more thing, small enough to doubt. We printed out Lily's cat picture from that morning, big as the paper would allow. In the china cabinet's glass, a soft blur rose and fell with the curve of a wrist. Or maybe it was glare. A trick of light can look like a person if you want it to. Still, if the wiped banister and that faint reflection belong to the same day, they whisper the same word: presence. Whisper, not prove. It was enough to keep me awake, not enough to accuse. Money was quieter, but clearer. The auditor did not speculate. He lined up dates. A couple of refills that landed earlier than the doctor's schedule. A cluster of small household buys, ordinary items close together on the calendar. A policy adjustment I barely remember from a messy month of paperwork. None of it shouted. Together, it nudged. He called them discrepancies and sent a neat memo to the detective. We left with copies and a list of follow-ups. Outside, the street looked the same. Inside, the picture stayed gray. But the edges were starting to show, and for the first time I felt I was letting the right people pull the thread. We went home in a silence that was not empty. It was a working quiet, like the pause between developing and printing a photograph. The picture existed. It was only a matter of letting it come up in the tray. The detective called just after dusk, voice careful, as if each word had edges. He asked us to come in. In the interview room, they laid our house out on the table. Photos of the stair, the bathroom cabinet, Lily's printed snapshot, the log from the auditor. A recorder clicked on. The senior detective spoke first. Based on the physical scene and the financial timeline, they believed they had probable cause to reclassify Anne's death. Probable cause. Hearing it said aloud felt like swallowing a stone. They would take it to the prosecutor in the morning. At the district attorney's office, a woman with tired eyes and a clean desk listened without interrupting, then slid a legal pad toward us. "We are opening a case," she said. "Second-degree murder." She did not dramatize. She listed steps: warrant, grand jury, arraignment, as if reciting the instructions to a life I had never planned to live. When she said homicide, I tasted metal. I signed my name to witness statements with a hand that remembered teaching that same name to a boy on wide-ruled paper. My entire body started shivering. I wanted to protect my late wife's legacy, but I wasn't ready for this picture. Clues connected. My son, most likely, was a murderer. Daniel surrendered with his lawyer 2 days later. We sat on the hard bench in arraignment, the room bright as a waiting room and just as cold. He came in wearing a blue suit I had never seen, the kind of color that photographs well. He scanned the gallery once, not to find us but to measure the room, then fixed his attention on the judge like a mirror he meant to tame. The charge was read. On the government side, the assistant prosecutor said the words I had been avoiding: staging, motive, risk of interference, and noted the protective order he had already brushed aside at the chapel. On the other side, his attorney wrapped Daniel in phrases about community ties and grieving sons and a father's new marriage. Watching it, I understood how a story can be told without any of the truth in it. When the prosecutor called it a case, I felt sick. The day Daniel was indicted for second-degree murder, the judge granted him bond. The conditions were standard: no contact with me, no presence within 100 feet, no interference with witnesses, a GPS ankle monitor. Surrender your passport. Curfew. He said, "Yes, Your Honor," as if agreeing to weather. Paper slid. Pen scratched. A deputy fitted the black band around his ankle. It clicked shut with a small final sound I will hear in my sleep. He signed the papers and walked out without looking at me. That absence of glance was its own kind of message. No plea, no apology, just the clean slice of a man who has already moved on to his next room. Miriam steadied me with a hand at my elbow. In the hallway, the buzz of fluorescent lights and the murmurs of strangers folded around us, and I understood that from here on, I was not Daniel's shield. I was a witness. A few days passed. Wood benches creaked, the state seal watched from above the bench, and the court reporter's keys began their soft, relentless chatter. The clerk read the caption like a tolling bell: State versus Daniel Hale. Miriam sat close enough that I felt the steadiness of her shoulder. Lily clutched a single yellow rose we were not supposed to bring, its stem hidden inside her sleeve like a secret. The prosecutor's table was a battlefield of binders and quiet confidence. On the defense side, everything gleamed: a blue suit, a polished pen, a smile taught to behave. I watched our life turn into exhibits. A photograph enlarged until you could see the ghost of a watch face in the china cabinet glass. A calendar of purchases that lined up too neatly with the day Anne fell. A coroner, careful and grave, explaining how bruises speak. A neighbor's camera catching a man-shaped blur leaving our side gate with a white paper bag. None of it shouted by itself. Together, it did not have to. The defense tried to give it other names: grief, coincidence, carelessness, but the pattern did not blink. Every time the state rested a new piece on the table, I felt something in me rest too, as if the truth had been looking for a flat place to set itself down. I looked at him. I looked at the sun I once tossed into the air above a summer lawn while Anne laughed and Lily was just a wish. I looked at a man who had already begun to plan the life he would live with my money. My love could not argue with the facts. He violated bond the day of the wedding. stepped into that chapel where my vows waited, put his hands on me and on Miriam in front of half of our town. The deputy at the back of the room did not even need to stand. He simply touched his radio and said 2 quiet words: "Remand him." The trial moved quickly because the case had been building for months, before it even started. The jury convicted him 3 days before we filed the paperwork recording the vows we'd already spoken at Miriam's kitchen table, a moment that felt truer than most promises I've made. Sentencing was scheduled for the following Friday. I did not sleep the night before. I lay awake next to my new wife and listened to the slow patience of her breathing. I had written and torn up my statement 4 times. At dawn, I gave up on eloquence and wrote the truth. In court, Daniel stared at the table. He did not look at me. He did not look at Miriam. He did not look at Lily, who sat beside her mother and clutched the yellow rose I had given her, a small bravado. When the judge asked if I wished to speak, I stood. I told the room that my wife had loved the way spring light came through the kitchen window and made our old china glow. I told them she wrote me lists that I still found in drawers, grocery items and small reminders, and always one line at the bottom that said something kind. I told them I had failed her by believing an accident because faith in my son felt easier than truth. And then I turned to the bench and I asked the court to protect the only child I had left from himself, because I could not do it anymore. The judge pronounced life without possibility of parole. He said the words quietly, as if trying not to bruise them further. The gavel sounded like a door closing. Afterward, in the corridor, Lily asked the question only a child can ask with terrible simplicity. Why did Dad do it? I knelt and told her the only answer that does not multiply harm. Because sometimes people love themselves more than the people who love them. That is not your fault. We drove home along the same road where Anne used to count the red barns to make bad days gentler. Miriam's hand sat warm on my knee, a steadying weight. We stopped at the chapel where the war began. The sexton had left the side door unlocked for us. We walked to the front pew and sat in the hush. I am not naive enough to believe that a sentence repairs everything it names. Tomorrow I will have to decide what to do with photographs and furniture and the imprint of a son I cannot hold in my arms without remembering fingerprints on a newel post. But in that quiet I felt something I had not felt since the night Anne died. Not joy, not even peace. Just room to breathe. At home, Lily ran to the backyard and came back with a dandelion bouquet for Miriam. My bride put them in a crystal vase next to the yellow roses like they were of equal value. Then she turned to me and smiled in that way that makes a kitchen into a harbor. We danced there on the tile, slow and careful, 2 old souls with a lifetime of love behind and enough ahead to be grateful for. I rested my cheek against her hair and counted the steady measures until my hands stopped shaking. I had been afraid that remarrying at 75 would feel like betrayal. It does not. It feels like stubborn hope. It feels like honoring the dead by choosing the living. It feels finally like closing a door on a house where a son mistook inheritance for love and opening another where a granddaughter learns that vows are not just words said under a steeple, but the life you build after the gavel falls. What is your view on a father turning evidence against his own son in this situation? Justice or betrayal? Share your perspective in the comments.
My grandpa's words really happened. I believe him. If you want more true tales stories like this, hit subscribe.